We have Jennifer Steelman here, and she's going to be presenting at our next meetup, talk about Kanban. And I want to give a chance to just do an interview with Jennifer. I've known her for, I guess, a couple years now since COVID, because we were doing ICAgile expert coaching cohort, right? And that
Yeah,
started just before COVID, and we were like, what do we do? So, Jennifer, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and what you do?
thank you, Greg. Yes, it was right before COVID, and the program got kind of derailed, put on hold for a minute, and then we picked it back up. So yeah, I am an Agile coach and Kanban trainer. I also train a couple of IC Agile classes. Been in the Agile space for about 7 years, 8 years maybe. And worked with a few different teams, a few different organizations, in Scrum and Kanban, and whatever frameworks the organizations I was at was using at the time.
Yeah. So,
Um,
and you talked about your experience as an Agile coach, and now you're a teacher at Kanban. How did you find your way being an IC Agile expert Agile coach? I love that. IC Agile expert Agile coach, and your journey you got through that process. What made you go that path?
Greg, I love learning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of a nerd there, I've always loved reading, and I like to when I learn kind of get interested in something, I tend to dive in, and that's what I've done. So my first one of my first classes early on as a Scrum Master was the one of the IC Agile coaching Agile teams course, and that was I'd say a game changer for me. And so um, through it, the person who kind of introduced me to it um, also had shared that there had been a cohort program or some sort of longer program, and then it had kind of um, had gotten hard to find for a while. I think the
Mm-hmm.
organization who did it, they weren't they weren't offering it any longer, and so it kind of had fallen off my radar. And then I saw um, that Team Catapult, which is where I know you from,
Right.
the course that we took together.
And Marsha
Um,
Acker, right?
yeah, with Marcia Acker, was offering it, um, and so yeah, I signed up for it, and it was my chance to dig deeper in.
So
Um,
how did you go from that to Kanban? Were you in Scrum first, and then go into Kanban? Were you always in the Kanban?
yeah, so I was in Scrum first, yes, and um, same organization as so at the same organization I was at when I joined the cohort. One of the teams was changing into kind of a different type of work that they were
Mm-hmm.
taking. And so collectively, a few of us got together and decided that it might be a good opportunity to try Kanban. However,
Okay.
I didn't know that much about it. So I dug into learning about it,
Okay.
and then fast forward through the and got to practice it with the team. And then fast forward past the cohort, past the Agile coaching cohort, I had run across um, the lack of better words, I'll call it an advertisement, but kind of an advertisement about Pro Kanban starting up and looking for trainers. And thought, I've been working with an Agile team for about a year now. So that sounds interesting. I've just gone through this big kind of cohort program where I learned more about the difference between the different stances in the coaching role
Mm-hmm.
of coach, mentor, trainer, facilitator, and it's kind of looking at what I wanted to do, not immediately, but like longer term down the road,
Right.
and thought, yeah, this seems like a good opportunity to look into the training and get stronger at Kanban as well. So I reached out and signed up.
Story is what it goes in the future.
And there it is. Right.
So jumping off the Kanban, and we're going to jump back onto it in a second here. But I wanted to ask you, everyone has these good days and bad days at work. Is there anything you do to overcome those bad days, the tough days you have in the office?
Let's see. I'd say a combination of things, but a lot of a combination of things. One, stepping away, taking the dogs outside.
There you go.
If it's summertime, gardening, this time of year, I'm thinking about gardening. So, stepping out into nature for a few minutes, that is very helpful. And then the other, so oftentimes, if I find myself either getting, I don't know, too much in my head on something, dwelling on it, or the other, which is probably more common for me, is just getting to that point where I notice that I'm trying to keep track of several things.
Right.
So the one where I'm trying to keep track of several things, just remembering to put it on my Kanban board. So I have my personal Kanban board. You can kind of see it in the blurred background here, but my Kanban, my board of just kind of those things that run through my head of the things I can't lose track of. I was a long time ago before I learned Agile, knew anything about Agile or knew anything about Kanban. I was a list maker. And so, instead of checking off those things on the list, now I've kind of moved on to putting them in a Kanban board and keeping track of them that way. And that way it keeps me from needing to try to remember everything. You can focus on that thing that you're really needing to focus on, or I can focus on whatever I'm needing to really focus on at the time, and those other things will be there when I'm done with that.
It just dawned on me when I asked that question, because I wasn't thinking about it, and then I said, "Oh, that's why I created this Slack chat channel too." It's when you get stuck in, I got an issue, I got a conflict, I got two people are like doing something or they're arguing, and one of the things I like to do is talk to other Agile coaches. I think we did it a lot during our cohort discussions, and that kind of made me create that Slack channel that I talk about on my show, where it's just a place for you to talk about issues going on. And my favorite one is the achievements. What did you say? Oh, they finally did this. I'm so happy. So you ever talk and vent with like other Agile coaches and Scrum Masters about life as an Agile coach?
I do. I think we've done that, Greg.
Yeah, we've done that.
Other people in our cohort, and I have a fairly regular previous coworker that I worked with. We meet fairly regularly. I mean, she's not saying she's regular, but we meet fairly regularly. That's kind of the basis of that conversation. It's our chance to get together and work through any coaching topics.
I think that's key. My only problem is some people think about when I say this is this, they think, well, oh my God, he's gonna talk about this to the person. I'm like, no, I'm just venting a little bit and getting that off my my chest and figuring out what's going on and off my mind, and just talking it out calms you down. Gets you to the next phase. So with that, why Kanban, and what's your favorite part of it?
Why Kanban? I think it's versatility. So I mentioned that I can just put, kind of those things that I need to do. I can put them on my, as my personal Kanban so that I don't lose track of them and can get through them. But as a team, it doesn't necessarily, there's steps that you need to go through there's certain aspects to do Kanban well. And to tell you the truth, the board on my wall doesn't necessarily qualify for that.
I heard a term of proto Kanban or something someone gave me one day.
Oh, okay. But I do try to practice good Kanban on my Well, but it's maybe something that is the focus on flow. Um, I'm really drawn
Yeah.
to that in
Okay.
not having that stop and kind of that idea of what you're going to do in the next week and holding to that. Just that if some teams find that harder to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that there can be better flow. We can still have different things added into it. So flexibility of Kanban is that you can use it just use the practices and metrics and elements described in Kanban that makes it Kanban, and then you can also use that. It's a lightweight as a strategy. You can use that along with other frameworks. So it pairs with Scrum as well. You can still use elements of Scrum. So for instance, my teams that I'm working with right now,
Mm-hmm.
the majority of the organization that of IT
Right.
runs as Scrum teams.
Okay.
And so with the Kanban teams that interface with those Scrum teams, we need to be able to set an expectation and kind of be able to come together. The two teams need to come together in a common language
Okay.
that they can kind of set those expectations of when something can be done. It's not a misconception of Kanban is that something's going to take as long as it's going to take, and that could be,
Yeah, I've heard that before.
an unending amount of time.
Right.
That's not true. You want to manage that time so that things aren't aging unnecessarily, and that's um, one of the metrics is to measure towards aging and not let things age unnecessarily.
Right.
So there's just bringing together that common language between the two teams, and the teams who are practicing Scrum can practice elements of Kanban, or you mentioned the whole thing right
Right.
along.
So on that note, what strategy you got? Like one or two strategies recommend for facilitating agile teams, especially a Kanban team that may be different from a Scrum team. How do you just like an idea? Like one, you don't have to do the whole thing, but just give us one idea of how you might facilitate a Kanban team a little bit different than you would a Scrum team.
Okay, yeah. So in both teams, it's important to visualize the work.
Okay.
And so I don't know that what I'm going to say is so different. I mean, you could do this for a Scrum team as well.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I notice that teams don't often do is look at those things limiting WIP. So limiting work in progress. You can do that with Scrum teams, and I think it's very useful for Scrum teams as well.
Mm-hmm.
But limiting that work in progress and getting towards a way of a team ownership to that work that's coming through the process versus I have my piece of work and I'm going to just focus.
I
Um,
totally agree with you. That's like the key of making Kanban so fast is you got a team of people working on it. I'm just gonna take my one story and I'm gonna progress it through the Kanban, all the columns, and do it that way. So then I
yeah,
totally sync
yeah,
in with that.
yeah. So similar. I mean, we talk about it in Scrum too, is where you can minimize those handoffs and practice it as a team
Yeah.
and work. Visualize that so where that system, all of the team members are responsible for work getting completed, um, rather than focusing on their own role and then
Yeah.
moving on to the next thing in.
Yeah. So, um, what are keys to motivating your agile team? Do you have a favorite way lately to get them motivated?
I think so. One of the things I like to try is to challenge them in those areas where they maybe first perceive that they don't have um, influence or control over changing something.
Mm-hmm.
So challenging those things that seem out of their control, to think of it as something like, what could we do differently to kind of pull it or make it into our, have some influence over it or control it. So one example in Kanban is maybe you have somebody who's going to need to review or be ready to look at something.
Right.
Maybe there's a security team or something that's going to have to do a step. You can't get, it's maybe not often enough to have a security person on the team, and you have to use somebody outside the team for it. But it's making sure that that person's ready. If you're going to pull this item in, is the person going to be ready to review it or to do their part when it's done? So for instance, I'm working with a team that they get it's a support team, so or an operations team, so that they get a lot of requests from other teams within the organization. They don't have a product of work that they're working on, but rather they have different requests coming in, and they would find a lot of things stalling, waiting on review from the requester.
Okay.
So once they worked on doing some tracking and realizing how long their part actually took,
Right.
they were able to reach out to, as they're pulling an item in, they shifted from just pulling the next item in and then letting it sit in that validation column to having an expectation of how long things took. So they had an idea of how long things took to get through their system, to get through their part of it, and when it would be ready for the validation. And now they reach out to that team, or the people who are requesting it. They reach out to those team members that are on other teams, and say, hey, we're getting ready to, your work is up next, and we'll need you in about 5 days. Can we go ahead and schedule that meeting? And then they're able to find out, hey, no, this person's going to be on vacation, or going to be in the middle of some big review, or no, I'm not the right person, select this person instead. Or, hey, can we wait another week? So maybe it's not as important. That way they're able to manage that priority as well.
So is that something, that interaction that you just described there about them reaching out, I really like that, where they reach out to the person, we're going to be ready in 5 days, you're going to be available, and they may not be. Is that like an interaction that made you happy when you see the teams going out looking for that?
Yeah, actually, yes, absolutely. So, and I didn't suggest to do that.
Okay.
I did suggest, how can you, I challenged the team to look at how can they be ready, like how can they gain some control over that part?
Okay.
What can they do? So the first things they worked on were getting better acceptance criteria. So some things that were so a clear cut in the end that they could, if they just documented that better, that they could handle all the review within their team and then return it to the person. Go. Other things needed somebody actually to come in and look. And so as they kind of chipped away at some of the other practices, they kind of came around to this. And so when I heard that, yeah, it was
I
awesome.
always love it when they go out to say, it's okay to reach out to other teams and find out when it makes sense, and don't take something out if the other group's not going to do it, and that's kind of the thing when I do the safe stuff, getting that dependency planning and who's doing what and what sprint, and with the Kanban teams, and making sure everyone's in a good spot. So we're talking about happy. So anything in the recent history, something you helped teams with that made you most proud? That you could say, if you're on the Slack channel and you said, hey, I have a win. What would you be your most, even the smallest little win that you just love the fact that it happened?
Yeah, so there was I was gathering information from a large group of teams, individually reaching out to each team to gather some information. Like if a team needs to reach out to your team for something, how would they reach you? What information do you need? Do you have a form? Do you have do you want them to create a ticket? If so, what is the link to create that ticket? Like what would it be? And then one of the questions on there was, what is the turnaround time? Like what's the expected kind of wait time for your team? And one of the teams came back and said our SLE is 10 days. And so SLE is one of the 6 minimum elements for the definition of workflow in Kanban. So using the actual terms like service level, SLE is service level expectation. And you get that from your data,
Right.
Learning how long things take to go through the process. And it's not just a number. So it's not always 10 days, but it's a 10 days with like 80%.
But they actually used the number from Kanban and actually.
But yeah.
Now, did the other person on the other side understand what they said?
Yes. Well, so no, maybe not. But they were reporting it back to me.
Okay.
And yeah, and they are using that for people. And so another team might say, hey, our sprint's 2 weeks long. Well, not everybody's going to know what that means either. Yeah, so you starting to get this vocabulary that you're sharing, and with that kind of becomes that education and repetition and expectation,
Yeah. So I always find that people think that we all talk the same vocabulary, understand it, because we talk it all day long, and they're like, oh yeah, everyone knows what we're talking about. I'm like, no. It's like everyone says everyone out in the industry is all being agile. I'm like, no, they're not. There's still a long ways to go.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Some of the teams came back and they're like, I don't even have a good guess. And then I get this team back, and it's that our SLE is 10 days.
Well, that's the part.
I think they missed the probability part in there, but that was okay. I was like, oh look.
Well, you're proud that they actually knew what it was for themselves, where other teams wouldn't know what it would be. Right.
Right. And they're using their data to help inform them. So
good.
they're practicing.
Well, that's awesome.
Learning.
Speaking of practicing learning, so what kind of continuous learning have you been done? Overachievers, all about learning. What a training book, a training, a class that you have liked or are working on right now?
So a book that I've been reading, Lead Without Blame by Diana Larson and Trisha Broderick is the book I'm currently reading, and I definitely recommend it. It's been a few weeks since I picked it up, but that's the one that I've been every time I have a few minutes, I'm currently taking my personal work in progress is out of whack right now, so I haven't picked it up in a minute. Yeah, that one's a good one too, the facilitation book.
I'm just holding up the art and science, the art and science of facilitation, how to lead effective collaboration among agile teams by Marsha Acker. She's the one who taught our class, so of course I had to buy her book. Actually, I think I took the facilitation class from her. I don't know. It was in the coach. We did it twice, to be honest with you. So, and actually, I'm going to take a part of her book, and the next meetup after this one, the one in March, I'm going to talk about getting that neutrality stance. And I find it interesting how it's the very first chapter in her book. How to get that neutral stance as a facilitator, which I think is such a key thing.
Yeah, interesting. I went from my yellow belt in Lean, my Six Sigma yellow belt here recently within my organization, because we still have a strong Lean department as well. And there was a section in there about facilitation, and they said, what comes to mind when you think of facilitation? And of course, my background is within Agile, and having read Marsha's book also, I said, what about neutrality? And there's other ones that came to mind too, but neutrality is so important, because a lot of times we come in, a lot of times we're part, as a facilitator, as a Scrum Master facilitator, you're part of the team oftentimes when you're facilitating.
Right.
So you have, it's hard not to have a a stance,
A stance or a bias or
stance.
skin in
Yeah,
the
stance is the
game,
right
right?
word. Thank you for using the word bias. A bias, an opinion, was more accurately the word I was looking for there.
Yeah.
It's hard not to have that, but at the same time, you don't want to. It's important to remain neutral and
Yeah.
not sway, not squash,
Okay.
other ideas and such in there too.
So to
So
get you come to our next meetup, give us feedback on that one.
yes.
So that's fine. Well, what was the
Um,
name of the book?
Lead without blame.
Lead Without Blame. Okay, so we'll look it up. Um, is there any classes you've been thinking about or any conferences?
I am, yeah, I'm taking one through Team Catapult, changing behavior and high stakes coming up. So that one I'm
Oh, okay.
being pretty jazzed about. That was one that I'd signed up for last year, and it didn't end up happening last year for me, and so this year's excited
Okay.
uh
Good for you.
go.
Yeah, I saw Marsha's postings of all her classes that she's going to offer this year, and I think that was one of the ones on the list. I still get her emails on stuff. So, with that, and every Tuesday night I do a jobs program where I put out what jobs are out there and how many are being posted in LinkedIn. And I think the LinkedIn algorithm's all messed up right now. But anyway, any stories about job searching, switching that you might want to share? Any lessons learned you had that you might want to hit? This something worked out for me, or keep an eye out for this from a job hunting perspective.
So for me, in my experience, looking at really looking at that job, whatever the job posting is you're going for, and having a good idea of, like how your skills relate to what you're seeing in the posting. Reading up on that organization, what you can come in, the people who come in with, a little bit of background, um, a little bit of research they've done that they're asking about. So for instance, my current organization, when I was looking at that, getting ready to apply and everything with it, looked on their website and saw that I knew they were going through an agile transformation. That was the team I was joining, was, as part of the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of an agile transformation. And I looked on their website to see kind of what's the history, and I saw that they had gone through a lean transformation. So I'm like, oh, that, like that's lean and agile are pretty, like there's a lot of
Kanban too, right?
similarities across. Yeah, Kanban is roots in lean. So I looked in, kind of looked in a little further on that. So it piqued my interest. I dug a little bit more, into it. And so then I was able to kind of drop that in the interview as well. So I
Cool.
think that gives some of that interest. So, but that's something that anyone can do. So it doesn't really show your depth of knowledge or anything like that. So also, just you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you.
Okay. Good.
You don't want to, you don't want to get in and it be a bad fit. So they don't want you to be a bad fit.
Yeah.
And you don't want to you don't want them to be a bad fit. So make sure that you do have some questions that
I
you're,
like the idea of looking at,
yeah,
see if there's something, even if it doesn't say it, but it shows that you did some research on the company in your field and kind of brought that up to their attention.
right.
So, with that, tell us something that's not in your LinkedIn profile. So, with that, let's sum up with give me one thing or two things that isn't in your LinkedIn profile. I know you have
Uh,
two
work,
dogs that aren't in the
yeah,
room.
three.
Three now?
I have three, and they are all in the
Oh,
room.
I have one
Yeah,
cat
and
that's
I don't think gardening's on my profile. So I actually take an agile approach to my gardening.
okay.
Um,
We're gonna have to save that one.
yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll save that one. We'll have to find out because I talk about agile approaches like I'm coaching this kids robotics class and how I apply Scrum and Agile to the coaching of the kids. They don't
Mhm.
know what they're being done, but it's being done to them.
My
Anyway,
garden either, but
so this is a great interview. I appreciate your time. Looking forward to you being here on the meetup.com meetup activity we're gonna do in February. Almost, it's like a week away from tonight. So February 15th. So it looks good.
Yeah.
All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you.